slightly. I'm going to do my presentation here. And the interesting thing is I fed this topic, the death of the old cybernetics that might lead to the birth of the new cybernetics. I give this topic to the AI engine called Gamma and ask it to generate a PPT for me. And it generates something, also 7 slides in just 10 seconds. Of course, I'm not going to use that, but I'm going to share both my slides and the AI slides with you later, and you can see the difference. Okay, so some basic presumptions. I have this little quality index of your piece of knowledge or our piece of knowledge arranged in 3 dimensions. The first dimension would be the level of your subjective understanding. It is like that famous story about Max Planck and his chauffeur going around talking about quantum mechanics, and then the chauffeur said, "It's so boring of me listen to you 100 times each lecture. How about the next one? I do the lecture for you, and you put on the chauffeur cap." Planck says, "Okay, that's good," and they did that, and the chauffeur made a perfect speech about quantum physics. And then there is a very troublemaking professor sitting down there, stand up and raise a very tough question. And the Planck said, the chauffeur says, "Oh my God, you guys are so naive to raise such a simple question. I will let my chauffeur to answer you." So he gave the microphone to Planck himself. So here, level of this is a subjective understanding that we can be just parroting what we learned from others or from a textbook, or we really understand the something under it, undercover. Second dimension is the level of richness of content in terms of the amount of information hidden in your knowledge. So it could be very simple as if you read a user's manual, you understand the functions of this device to serve you. But you probably not necessary to understand the design structure behind this user function, and also the lower level logics. So that's but the lower level information is already enough for you to use. You don't have to ask anymore. For example, nobody asks about how does a thermostat work, and they don't care. But as long as it works. But the third dimension is more important. It's the level of operational feasibility in reality. So can this piece of knowledge be made to useful technology? You just mentioned autopoiesis. So what will be the autopoietic-driven technology out there? Is that engineering-wise, it is feasible? This criteria can filter out a lot of what I call waste of academic waste. That people writing tons of papers, big tomes, and ended up in paper recycler not being used. And of course, engineering and technology sounds like a first order. So in the second order part, can this piece of knowledge improve organizational effectiveness? Can it improve probability of you're winning a game in game theory, in a game situation. And this piece of knowledge can improve your probability of your survival in the rivalry, existential rivalry cases. So here, my perspective is the dimension 3, or simply called application, is the most important index, in my honest opinion. And this overlaps to answer number 2 of Lucia's presentation, applications. I think a lot of problem is because the application is missing. Next one. First, this logo is famous ChatGPT, and it made a huge splash recently, considered as a huge progress. Now, I noticed that its CEO, its president are both dropouts from universities, and its chief scientist and its chief technology officer are also not dropout, but they're immigrant from Russia, from Albania. None of them heard about American Society for Cybernetics, my guess. No connections. And they even don't mention anything about cybernetics. Now, this table also corresponded to Lucia's data. I collected this data from their website, American Society for Cybernetics, ISSS, and this is International Coaching Federation. Coaching is, in my view, is purely application of cybernetics in psychology area. And they started in 1995. And now they have more than 50,000 members from 166 countries. Their conference size is 1,600 people more. And they had a credential program that reward people to going through their learning process. So that's ICF. Now, ODN, I have mentioned many times because they had a very interesting book called the Change Handbook. In other words, you serve as a consultant or a facilitator getting into organization to improve their effectiveness. And that book, I mentioned several times recently, Stuart Appleby acknowledged it as a very important book. They started a similar age with ISC, 1968. And their membership is much larger, conference size much larger. And they have a class every year to spread their curriculum. IAF is International Association for Facilitators. Again, this is purely second-order cybernetics area. They work for various kind of organizations in the aim of improving organizational effectiveness and efficiency. Started in 1994, also pretty large than us here.
Right.
And the last one I just recently signed up is Operational Research Society in UK. Not in UK, actually they are the global, but the coming conference in September I'm going is that on September, similar time with Jerome's conference. This one is pretty old, 1948. And I mentioned this one here is because many years ago, I had translated a book by Ross Ackhoff. And in the last chapter, Ackhoff declared that the future of operational research has died. Pretty much like what we said today here, that old cybernetics is died. But surprisingly, they're not died yet, and they renewed themselves. So I think in a similar spirit, maybe we can do the same as well. And I missed Raoul and the Eagle organization called the WOSC. That organization does have the name Cybernetics in it. But I think it is time that we consider a paradigm shift. As the first generation cyberneticians already passed a long time ago, Wiener, Ashby, von Forster, etc. And the second generation cyberneticians start dying too, such as we just lost our Klaus or Lloyd, just right here in this club. Yes, so another perspective to look at this data is perhaps I agree with Lucia, is that something is wrong with the old cybernetics, because you look at recent years, the important people who made huge influence in the progress of our society. You look at Bill Gates, you look at Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and here the OpenAI people. These individuals are not linked to ASC, not linked to ISSS either. So a little bit impolite, I think, ASC and ISSS and other international associations oriented in system thinking and cybernetics, they are too much leaning towards abstractions with very poor action agenda. And if you notice that in our welcoming
Jason, I think that Peter doesn't realize that your microphone is on, Peter, so we can hear you.
All right.
Okay, anyway, so I think it is time that we really do this good reflection. I just said to Lucia's presentation as 3 very important, because I have been nagging the same topic with my colleagues for several years, quite many years actually, at least 10. And my colleagues sounds like all have a deaf ear towards the invitation of reflection, this issue. So today, I think, thanks to Lucia's comprehensive presentation from a historic perspective, we really need to start this process of reflection. From the very beginning, we need to think about why do we believe in science and how do we actually do science. In my humble opinion, a lot of papers I read in ASC and ISSS meetings are not actually doing science, just doing philosophy. And what are our outcomes? Yeah, no matter what you say, no matter how fancy your models are, what are the result outcomes is more important. And regarding to those outcomes, who are our users, what they need, and what are their challenges? A lot of us got disconnected with those links. So it is really important we think, what are we doing towards helping our users, and what actions do we call for our audience user? and what they will miss if they don't act. So what they will miss if they don't have us. Okay. And the new associations using the term systems and complexity are mushrooming one after another. None of them using cybernetics as their keyword. So here I had a simple list here, only on this century. See, you can see it's all about systems, complexity, information, design, and control and communication even. But they just don't use the word cybernetics. So that must be a reason there. So positively speaking, it is time that we start forming a new vision about the next step for cybernetics. The first one, I think, is to converge into a standard model, like what physics had done. Of course, the standard model in physics is also being challenged, but that doesn't matter because it will define a frontier. That if you think you're working on a frontier, you go directly to challenge the standard model. But currently, we do not have standard model. And we even do not have a shared definition. So whenever you open a cybernetics book, you will see at least a dozen different definitions by Bateson, by von Forrester, by Pask, by you name them. But each one contribute a definition. Yes, to one way it is good, it is fun, it is rich, but to the student, to the first day student, it's confusing them. So I think we need a standard model. That's the first thing. And with this standard model, we can form a core curriculum. And we can find home in university as required course. Here, I would agree, some of you just mentioned that it's more related to mathematics. So maybe cybernetics will become a required course in a range of mathematics. That is possibility, because all other disciplines will need some sort of mathematics, more or less, sooner or later. So do a definition, do a curriculum. Second is that the cybernetics can be perceived with my 4 category of 4 types of science. So we can stop the fuzzy about the second order cybernetics, third order cybernetics, blah blah blah. That confuse students. Instead, we use a 4 type of science category. Type 1 is the earliest one that we're all very familiar with, namely natural science. It points to engineering, cybernetics. It's about the old automatic rocket science. It is already there in every home's homostat. It's in those automatic toilet seats. I once disassembled an automatic toilet seat and identified the 7 different engineering cybernetic circuits in that one seat, controlling water, controlling temperature, blah, blah, blah. And all the way to what Elon Musk is doing on SpaceX. So that is well-defined, very mature, and very sophisticated. Now, in category of science 2, it's about 6 C's here, starting from cognition, and then once you have your own cognition, you have the base to communicate with others, so communication. And from communication, simple directive communication, you can engage into dance-like conversation situation. So conversation is the third C. And perhaps through the conversation processes, you have a chance to reach to a new emergence called consensus. And if a group has this consensus, coordination becomes possible and the cooperation becomes possible. And in this area, you have no natural science law. You do Newton's, Einstein, quantum mechanics doesn't work here, but cybernetics principles can contribute a lot here in this area. Now, science number 3 is what I call advancing game theory, including today's rule binding computation, and including the large language models, including a lot of network science here, to be used in a situation that different groups and different parties are obeying the same rule, playing a game of computation. Now there is the last area, which is still very dark there. It is a new territory of what people call unlimited warfare. It's about survival from existential rival forces. In this area, my belief is cybernetics can contribute a lot, but very few people are doing work here yet. The third point is that I presented elsewhere to ISSS, that we need to abandon the pro-planning elitist approach and to adopt a grassroots toolbox approach in the participatory cultural context. For example, the usage of VSM, early efforts trying to use VSM is in a situation like, Canadian government. It's like I myself had tried with the Chinese government as well. The approach is, look, here is something produced by a genius named Stanford Beer. Okay, let me explain to you VSM system 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, blah, blah, blah. And if you reorganize the organization in this way, you will be better off, things like that. It's expert intervention. I do not think this works. Recently, the newest published book by Angela Spinoza talked about their usage of VSM in British government. Especially, they helped NHS, the health system. Well, I don't know the exact name, but it's a huge organization. They tried to make case and people listen to them. But if you look into their book in detail, you notice that they are doing less elitist approach. They are doing more participatory approach. So I think the direction is to make something ready to be used by people who are not familiar with cybernetics terms. So it is our duty, it's our responsibility to develop those toolboxes. Number 4 is we do have some new front that, in my opinion, the concept of feedback can be generalized into circular causality And to analyzing a more complex system, we can distinguish 12 different types of circularities instead of just the earlier 2 or 4. And self-organization theory, as based on writings of Ross Aspey and von Forster, Prigogine, etc., can also be expanded into a more sophisticated form, addressing more complexity problems. And final point is that we really need to switch to action-oriented. We really need to operationalize whatever you have been working on. So my proposal is that we do a shift from just paying attention to the observer to OTA, I call it. This concept is in a welcoming screen. Observer, thinker, actioner combined as a trinity. So the point is, please do not forget action. My last slide. If you agree with what I said earlier, then we have 2 very major products that we need to develop in cooperation, if possible. The first one is what just mentioned, the standard curriculum that has a wide consensus. I mean, currently all the associations that use the keywords system science, system thinking, cybernetics, complexity could agree with. So that is an important criteria. If you are doing something which is not agreed by most of these organizations, then we can leave it out for a while. But we can put it into the second product. I like to use the metaphor of a toolbox. A toolbox containing multiple stuff there that can be used in different situations. And I would like to expand this metaphor into a tool store. Okay, the tool store that you're familiar with in Lowe's, in Home Depot, and in both UK and Germany, they have a similar store names. I just don't remember. In that, you can find all kinds of tools. But we will develop this tool store. So we can collect all the methodologies that are being used effectively by people and make them neat and tidy, ready for the next generation students. And a little bit of bold ambition is perhaps it is time we start perceiving to form an overall organization, WSO, World Systemic Organization, at the level of WHO and WTO. And in that way, this organization can push educational training curriculum development more effectively to be a scalable operation and plan to spread to as many countries as possible. That's my presentation. Objections?
Well, a quick comment, Jason, is number one, I thought it was very well organized conceptually and has several very novel aspects to it, which are well worth exploring and pushing out into fleshing out is better into what that sort of substantial action plan would look like, and which you could then seek resources to develop. And that obviously would require a lot of resources of various sorts beyond the human capital that might be available. So that part I like. And then it's sort of a simple-minded question. Have you actually classified 12 different forms of circularity? And
Yes.
If so, what are the logical distinctions between them?
I sent you some writing or PPT, something like that later.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Jerome, you raised your hand.
Yes, I have to go in a minute, but just a quick response to the very last comment, Jason, you made about creating an organization on the level of the WTO and the World Health Organization. Of course, these two organizations have a very different history, very different origins. And I mean, just one of the issues of cybernetics and complexity science is to consider the history of a system as information and as part of the character of that system. And so I don't have time to talk about the history of the World Health Organization, but there's a very interesting book by, oh goodness, it's so hot here. The name of the book is Globalists. It's not Max Blumenthal. I've even spoken with him before. Anyway, I have to look it up. It actually focuses on the fact that it was a very political movement of what you call today neoliberal thinkers, and the fact that these people had a clear ideology that they shared. The WTO was quite connected with the Mont Pelerin Society, people like Friedrich Hayek, and in Germany we have Ludwig Erhard, one of the first chancellors of the Federal Republic of Germany. So again, these people had a very clear logic, a very clear political agenda, and that connected them and that allowed them to find partners and stakeholders and people even to finance their interests. So I think that keeping that in mind is an important fact that one would have to consider when developing these kinds of institutions. You have to find a shared common denominator, and I don't want to say an ideology, but certainly that it helps to have a shared point of reference and a narrative that you can then expand upon and build upon. Just to say that.
Gaurav, you're nodding.
Oh, you're talking to me. Sorry. There are a number of reactions, and one of them is, of course, Jerome's. But I was thinking of a different reaction, which is in essence that what you are proposing is to say, well, there are a number of difficulties with these various organizations like the ISSS and the Cybernetics, but also the SADM, the decision-making organizations, and similar organizations. And in all of them, the major difficulty is that although the initial effort was to change from a reductionistic type of methodology to a different type of methodology, in all of them they have failed. So there is only one solution, which is to go and organize a new organization where we can start with a different type of methodology. Is that correctly summarized?
Well, think about that. Lucille raised her hand.
Yeah. Okay. First comment is just. First of all, thank you very much for your speech, Jason. It was very interesting. I would like that you can extend the tab that you showed about the associations, because there are many more than those. For instance, I have seen that there are the European associations of cybernetics and system science. There are at least three. There there is also, for example, even the WOSC, which is also world level association. I mean, it could be interesting to put all together in the tab and see when they born, how many members, and so on. That's very, very interesting. But then my comments, I mean, conceptual comments are in first one is about the 4 questions that you listed. I would say that the first one had to be reformulated because the question is not at least I don't like to say if we believe or not believe in science, because it's not a question of belief. That it's precisely the demarcation between science and not science. There is not a question of belief. It's a question about defining what are the methods, what is a demonstration, what is a strong argument, what is not, etc., etc. I mean, in philosophy of science, it's called the demarcation problem, and it's actually better to reformulate in that way, because otherwise belief seems that can be also at the same level of religion. No, do you believe in God?
But it also created a chance to dialogue or conversation with religion, right? You have your belief, I have mine.
That's what I meant.
Proofs, what is a proof? I mean, I would reformulate at least that. It's my view. The other point is your second question is very important. Is how to do science, and actually that's a point. What are the methods? What are the measures? I mean, and different methods and different measures for different branches of science. And in this respect, I would underline very, very much, and it's also something about the comments on my speech, about the role of scientific communities. Science is made within and with scientific communities. Just you showed the tab about the communities, scientific communities of operation research, cybernetics, system science, and so on. Scientific communities, they have a very strong role, and more every year. I mean, they can orient the knowledge. They can orient the work of their members. They can decide what to do and what not to do. I mean, what is legitimate, what is a good question, and what is not a good question. And this also addresses to another big issue, and it's involving again cybernetics and system science. There is the question of what is the mainstream and what is the fringe. You know, in this sense, science is like big religions. There is okay, under the umbrella of Catholic Church, there can be so many different approaches, so many heterodox approach. But when you say what is Catholic Church, then there is the doctrine, there is something very, very precise, and that's the mainstream. So the same is in economics. Yes, there can be, Jerome, that economist that is speaking or using the concept of utopiasis. But, you know, it's just some very, 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 let's say, episodical phenomena. Somebody is liking stuff for beer or liking BSM model, and then you can find a small group of people working with that. But that's not mainstream. That's not scientific community. That's not what people do in that branch of science. And so that's important. I mean, my speech before was just in respect to this, saying, did cybernetics fail or succeed? Because the question is respect to how was influencing the mainstream. If it's influencing some peripheral scientist, with all my respect, of course, who is doing something in some place in the world, in some, okay, but that's a different issue. Respect to win or lose. Let's okay, that's my comment.
Professor Muley, we haven't seen you for a long time.
Yes,
Can you say something?
the reason is that I'm no longer in systems theory very much. I mostly work on social responsibility, which as an application of systemic behavior. So I'm here to listen what you have news to say. Thank you for your contributions.
Okay. Peter? Larry? Please, go ahead.
I just had a remark to add that I forgot to include regarding circular causality in the biological and neural sciences. I once asked Jerry Lettvin, who was a colleague of McCulloch and Pitts, and who was successfully pursuing a research program using cybernetics to understand brain function. And he referred me to Werner Reichardt's group, Max Planck Institute for Biological Cybernetics in Germany, who were studying the optomotor loop in flies. And Reichardt started this research program, and people there subsequently pursued it and opened up the various feedback links of that circular causal system quite successfully to understand how the whole system works in subserving behavior. So I just wanted to add that. I think perhaps the reason why cybernetics did not persist, I mean, some of it has to do with the lack of an economic engine underlying it, but some of it is also the schism that occurred with the branching off of second order cybernetics and the departure of scientists and engineers from various cybernetic organizations. It was sort of a slow departure, so that cybernetics no longer became associated with purposive systems and robotics and brain function and really psychology, and more associated with continental philosophy and postmodern sensibilities, let's say. And I think that all that had occurred by the 1990s, certainly. So in a sense, cybernetics has sort of marginalized itself. It need not be that, because there are core ideas in cybernetics that we still do not have in AI or machine learning that need to be front and center. We're going forward with machines that can do for us those things that we can't do for ourselves. So I guess that's what I would have to say.
Thank you. Larry?
I would just echo Lucio's comment that science is not about belief. Science is something that's useful, and when it's useful, we use it. I think it's also important that in cybernetics, recognize that at least in the more recent, the newer version, that it no longer is relegated to science. And I remember in 1987, Humberto Maturana came to me when I was president of the American Society for Cybernetics and said he wanted to propose that cybernetics be the science and art of understanding. And I immediately said, and the art is important, right? And he said, yes, the art is important. I I had a conversation sometime in that same time frame with Gordon Pask, where the subject of science and art came up. And I think it was in the context of trying to show how they were both important. And he said, for him, they're the same. And I don't think he was saying that they're synonyms. I think what he was saying was you can't have science without art, and you can't have art without science. They go together, and they're both important. And this perspective on cybernetics is, for me, quite important. I think where they particularly come together, and this is a much more recent phenomenon in cybernetics, is the idea of design. And design as an approach to knowledge, to thinking, to society is something new. And it is something that is still very, in my experience, limited to the cybernetics community.
Jerry.
Myself?
Yeah, you raised your hand.
Yeah, yes. My mind had wandered. Okay. First, I would very, very strongly disagree with you, Jason and Lucio, both with regard to the nature of science. This word science comes down from the notion of epistemology and the general notion of knowledge. And the fact that those people, or us group of people who call ourselves scientists, prefer to use a certain form of language, a certain form of logic, a certain sense of community, etc., about our belief systems doesn't change that all of the scientific communities are involved in some form of epistemology and the development of knowledge, the exploration of what it means to have meaning to communication, for example. So that part I would just say, yeah, we're playing language games here to a certain extent, and I prefer to consider science as part of the overall development of human knowledge, as opposed to being associated with particular individual professions. So that part of it. The second,
science isn't the only source of knowledge, though. You're not saying that.
No, I'm saying exactly the opposite. Yeah, so the second, I would agree with Larry's comments here, but I think underlying this desire that motivates for people both in the natural sciences and the arts is some sense of human progress, some sense of mutual well-being for ourselves and our families and our communities and our world. And so I approach the topic from that part of it, and then view cybernetics as, well, how does cybernetics contribute to this overall perspective of the world and what actions we take? And then I would add one final comment on a different sort of topic. And that was, Jason, I really wanted to compliment you on your notion of 6 C's that were organized in a very, very coherent way with regard to the source of human actions. And that we first start with cognition and then progress outward from there. And that part of your commentary, I thought, was really a very original contribution to the relationships between, for example, information theory and practical applications of the knowledge we have. And so that I thought that was a very nicely thought out, and that part of it. So overall, I would also say that this has been a wonderful session. It's been some novel syntheses and some novel perspectives presented and integrated in a very pleasing way, at least for me. So thank you, Jason, for organizing this.
You are welcome. Bernard, you want to say something? Bert?
Well, just to thank you for your last slides, because I think the program you outline, which is extremely ambitious, is precisely that what Lucio explained, that it did not happen. This was with cybernetics nor with systems theory so far, unless we consider as part of such a development what I called undercover cybernetics, the diffusion of concepts, parts of theories into the different disciplines.
Great. We already passed our time. Lucio, could you email me your slides? I can share it with every other members of today's session.
Sure, I will, and I will try also to take into account some of the comments, so integrating the slides with the discussion.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. A number of us has to leave earlier, but anyway, this is a very good session. Thank you for all your thinking.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for